Today I'm going to work with some two-point perspective in lettering, and I'm going to use scaling as well. You can see that my picture plane is actually a worksheet. This is on legal size paper, and the rectangle in the middle is 8.5 by 11. So I can cut the sides off when I'm done and just have a blank piece of paper with no worksheet on it whatsoever. I'm going to eliminate these two horizons and just use the one at the bottom, so I'm going to give myself a worm's eye view looking up at my picture to do that. This worksheet is engineered so you can pick one of 3 different horizons, and the vanishing points are provided. There is no real advantage to whether you use the worksheet or not. The advantage here is that the vanishing points are outside the picture plane, and when you cut the sides off, they will no longer be part of the image. Because our center of vision is going to be where things are clearest in our linear perspective drawing, and we want our center of vision to be far away from those vanishing points on the side, because the closer we get to those vanishing points in a two-point perspective, the more warped our picture will look. And the closer we get to the center between them, the better it will most likely look. So what I'm doing is I'm making one big box in two-point perspective here. You can see I've run one vertical line, and then I've run lines of perspective from the top and the bottom. And the vertical line goes above the horizon and just below the horizon. So here's my first box, and I'm going to start some lettering along this side. So I want to start making big, tall rectangles that look like a letter could fit inside them. I'm also going to measure off space in between the letters, which will be thinner than the letters themselves, so that I have sort of an alleyway in between. Now I'm using like angles to figure out the same size box in the next area. Remember, like angles, we take the angle from one box, corner to corner, and we just take that same angle into the next box, corner to corner, and we figure out what size it should be. So here's like angles on the space in between, as well as the space of the letters themselves. And we can adjust our width for each of these in between the spaces and in the letters themselves as we go along, moving one angle to the next place, to the next place, to the next place over. What using like angles really does is make sure that the lines, as they get shorter going back, match the same ratio as the lines getting closer together vertically going back. So each of the boxes will get substantially smaller as the lines get closer together in perspective. Now you can see that I'm making many boxes in the same way over and over again and getting all of those sizes put together. Not all letters will necessarily be the same width, but I'm going to treat them as if they are right here. And I've already decided on my word. It's going to be scale, because we're going to be scaling this picture and making things look like they are the correct size and scale, I do believe, throughout. So I'm going to start using the same paradigm that I used when I did letters in one-point perspective, but in this case I'm making sure that instead of horizontal lines, I have lines going back to the vanishing point on the right. In single-point perspective, we have vertical lines, horizontal lines, and lines going back to the vanishing point. In a two-point perspective like this, we have vertical lines, but no more horizontal. We have lines going back to the vanishing point on the right and the vanishing point on the left, and you get to pick which one of those would have been the front with horizontal lines, but either way, we lose that horizontal unless it's actually on the horizon. You may also notice that I'm making all of these lines really light to start with. I can darken them up later, but if I darken them too early, it can be difficult for me to see exactly what things are erased. And the erasing is going to be just as important as the drawing. Now you may have noticed that I made all of my lines that would have been horizontal back to the right vanishing point, and I'm dropping then lines of perspective to the left vanishing point off of the corners of the front of this object. It's as if I were doing 2 single-point perspectives at an extreme angle. And that's going to be the heart of our two-point perspective. We lost the horizontal, but we gained another vanishing point. And we want that vanishing point outside our picture plane if we can, because if we get too close to it, we'll get a bit warped, just like getting too far away from the vanishing point on a single point perspective warped our image. I'm sure you can tell at this point of the video that I've sped this up quite a bit, so you would not be working this fast. I don't normally work this fast. This is times 8 at the moment. Now I've gotten out of your way here so you can see that I put a box on the front. This box is to help give me some perspective and some scaling. I'm going to put a human figure in there, and to do that I want to make it into 8 sections. This box is going to be a heroic proportion figure, and we know that heroic figures are about 8 heads tall. To do that, I've divided it in half with an X on one side, and then I'm dividing the halves in half so I get fourths, and then I'll divide those fourths in half and I will get eighths. It makes it easier that way. So here I have 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes tall there, and then if I divide those in half, I get eighths. And once I have 8 boxes stacked on top of each other, I can start putting the head in the top one and the shoulders starting in the second one, and then when I get down to the 4th one, I've got the hips, so I can just divide it into 8 sections and make a heroic figure here. Because we put so much of our mental real estate into the human figure, this will take a little while, so I'm going to jump cut, and you can see that I put myself here as a art hero in heroic proportion on the front. I'm also putting a city skyline in the distance. We're looking way up at this, which makes the buildings look very tall. And you can see that instead of, as we did with a single point perspective, having a rectangle on the front, I have vertical lines, and then lines going back to the vanishing point on the right, and the vanishing point on the left will help with those windows and tops of the buildings. And because the tops of the buildings and the tops of the letters are above the horizon, we cannot see down on top of them. Instead, we are looking up at them. And notice how I am lining up the windows on one side of the building with that vanishing point, and then the windows on the other side are lining up with the windows on one side and the other vanishing point. So I'm making sure that they match. You may have also noticed that I've been darkening recently the lines that I've been keeping. I'm going to do that on the outside of these buildings as well so that we can see that. I may lighten them up because they are in the distance, but for now I'm going to work right across here and darken the edges. So far we've done linear perspective on things on the ground. Let's do something up in the sky. So here I put a box in the sky, and I'm going to start playing with it and see what will go here. Maybe an airplane or a fighter jet. That would be neat. To do that, I'm going to find the center of this box, and it's not just a rectangle that I drew, but you see that the lines go back to the vanishing points on both sides. I'll draw another box here sort of as part of it. And now I have 2 boxes next to each other. I haven't entirely decided what I'm going to do with this, but I think I'm going to put a silhouette of a plane in here, and that'll give us an airplane up in the sky we're seeing down from below it. So to do that, I'm going to put in the fuselage and maybe some wings. Maybe we'll make it a fighter jet. As a silhouette like this, it becomes a study in positive and negative space, the fighter jet being the positive space, but I'm going to fill in flat in perspective. So even without all of the details, you can still do a perspective drawing using silhouettes. And the little bit that I know about fighter jets, that tail looks a little large, so I think I'm going to need to shorten it up a bit there. This then begs the question, why is there a fighter jet up there? I could just leave it, or I can give it a reason. So I think I'm going to work with Godzilla. I suppose I could do King Kong, but then I would put in the Empire State Building someplace, and I think I'm done with the buildings for now. I look up on the internet, I find a nice posable toy that looks like Godzilla, and I think I will work with that. I'm going to make sure that his feet are on the ground, so they need to go below the horizon. At least the toes need to. He's going to go way back there, and he's going to be very close to the horizon because he's standing way, way far back from me. And I know that the farther up the bottom of the object is closer to the horizon when it's on the ground, it will look like it's farther away. And that would be basic rule number 1, surface placement. Considering my surface placement here, I'm going to put a grid on the ground to make it look like there's some sort of scale going on here, like we did with the single point perspective, but in this case we don't have any horizontal lines on those. It's all back to the vanishing points, and those tiles become diamond shapes to us as we go across. Try to space out each one of those, but I get a tiled surface now below. Once more, I'm going to do a jump cut. This finished rendition has a lot more shading, a lot more detail. You can see I've put spaceships in the sky on one side, more fighter jets, more detail in Godzilla, myself. Everything gets shaded, different shades. You can see that there are shadows and cast shadows, but I still have those horizon lines on the side as part of the worksheet. Time to cut those off. As a worksheet, it allows us to have vanishing points outside the picture that move with us. So if I put the picture away and pull it back out, the vanishing points are still in the same place. If I were leaving this on a drawing board someplace where I could put vanishing points on the surface of that board or on a piece of tape outside that board and keep it there, I wouldn't have to worry about moving the picture. I could do the same thing, which is what many artists do. But in this case, moving the vanishing points with the picture really helps. Using these relatively complex shapes in two-point perspective is a good way to exercise your knowledge of perspective. If you can do this, you can do almost any shape in space. By varying your color, your shading, and your textures, you can create all sorts of different images. At this point, those buildings that we found difficult before become very easy compared to the letter forms. Remember, the pictures become more relatable when we relate them to the size of the human form. But that doesn't mean that we have to have human forms in them. The exact same techniques can be used for interior pictures, and we are no longer tied to a single vanishing point. Each object in the picture can have up to 3. To create better illusions of reality, you should be using linear perspective.